A dystopia is a made-up society in which there is great suffering or injustice. In the dystopia, there is a dictator-type figure that controls people with how they speak, think, write, or listen. They do this by censoring people and getting rid of basic rights, such as freedom of the press, freedom of speech, or just freedom of religion. There are 4 common traits in a dystopia. There is censorship, constant surveillance, citizens living in a dehumanized state, and that individuality is bad. Censorship was seen in Brave New World, Harrison Bergeron, and Utopia. In Brave New World, people were censored by what they were allowed to read, and they had to follow a specific religion. In Harrison Bergeron, the censorship came in the form of earpieces that were put on certain people to keep them from thinking too long. They also censored what someone could see whenever they were watching television. Utopia had a weird way of censoring in which the only main censor was that people were forced to learn how to farm for 2 years. For those 2 years, they had to live on a farm and work it. Another common trait is surveillance. In Brave New World, it isn't really noted that the people are in constant surveillance, but if you think about it, whenever the riot started, the riot police were able to get there in a very quick time. It seemed like they were kind of watching what was happening unfold. In Harrison Bergeron, you could tell that there was constant surveillance because whenever Harrison entered the newsroom, the handicapper was able to get there in a short amount of time to be able to kill him and the ballerina. In Utopia, they used surveillance to see how people traveled around the island. If you didn't have a passport, you were not able to get around the island, and if you were seen without a passport 2 times in a row, you were put under slave ownership. The third common trait of most dystopias is that citizens live in a sort of dehumanized state. This means that they do not think or act the way a normal human would. In Brave New World, one of the things people are conditioned to is to not grieve whenever someone dies. They do this by giving the children treats whenever somebody passes away in the hospital. With Harrison Bergeron, people are required to wear handicaps and sometimes an earpiece. These earpieces will make people not be able to think for long enough to be able to come up with full thoughts, making them not able to think outside of the box. In Utopia, people live with up to 15 other adults, and everyone wears the same simple clothing, so nobody feels any different than anybody else. The fourth common trait of most dystopian societies is that individuality is bad. In Brave New World, you can see this in Bokanovsky's process. This is a process where they create millions of twins out of the same organ. In Harrison Bergeron, there were handicaps put on people such as birdshot bags, which made someone weak to where they would feel just as weak as the weakest person in the society. And in Utopia, people were forced to learn how to farm for 2 years, and they were only allowed a certain amount of education. The most successful characters in these books. I feel like John was the most successful character because he didn't conform to the ways of society and he was able to keep his own beliefs. When John entered to the new world, he enjoyed it, but he still didn't feel right. And it was because everyone was too happy and there was no pain or suffering. It became more apparent to John that people were in a bubble when the children at the hospital were given treats when someone died, like his mom. John didn't like the way society was, so he moved away from it, but unfortunately it followed him. In Harrison Bergeron, Harrison was the most successful character because he went into the newsroom and showed to the world that he disagreed with the society. He ripped off his handicaps and the handicaps of the musicians and one ballerina. He danced with the ballerina until the handicapper came in and killed both of them. By making it to where something might feel normal to someone, but unnormal to others. An example of this is how in some countries it is common for minors to drink alcohol, but in America, if a minor is found with alcohol, it is illegal. This could affect literature by making the author write about how something is unnormal to them, but somewhere else it could be completely normal. This is the same with a dystopia. If someone writes about how traits of a dystopia are unreal or unnatural, it could be very normal for other people in other countries.